Well, I am very excited to introduce to all of you Linne van der Meulen. She is our Impact and Strategy Officer at the School for Moral Ambition. And she was the, well, I think the second employee of the School for Moral Ambition. So she's really old school. And at the very beginning, Linne started with the prioritization research for the fellowships, the Food Transition and the Tobacco Free Future Fellowship. And she also did a presentation about that. You can find that one back in our resources. I will also share the link here in the chat if you're curious about those two topics and why we got there. Um, After that, Linne has moved into our strategy team, where she's now doing the monitoring and evaluation of the programs that we run at the school. And she's also doing the evaluations of our general programs and the general strategy of the School for Moral Ambition. So she's doing a lot, and today she's going to share some of her expertise that she has gained in the past years working here. Um, well, without further ado, I would love to hand the words to Linne.
Yeah, thanks, Meulen, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. It's really great to see many of you, also on video. Really happy to be here. We promised at the start, it will be a session on impact thinking and all about prioritization. And I hope I can make all of this a bit less abstract for you. So basically, what it comes down to for me is this quote by the anthropologist Margaret Mead, who very famously wrote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing it ever has." So this whole session, I basically like to take you through how is this related to impact thinking, prioritization? How does it guide the work that we do at SMA, and why might it be relevant for your work wherever you are in your career? So let's get into that. So what I will go through today is first a bit background, like what are some of the ingredients of moral ambition. And then how does that translate to prioritization? Why do we think it's important to prioritize? And then also how do you do this? How do we do this at the school? And finally, a concept that we call value over replacement player. We'll let that be a bit of a cliffhanger if you are not familiar with that, what that is about. But it's also connected to impact thinking, very much related to your career. So, if you think of what are like the key ingredients of moral ambition, one is that we're trying to redefine this definition of success. So, if you think about it, ambition is just in its essence, it's just a raw fuel. It's not, it's neutral. It's a positive or negative. It's just raw fuel. It's really about what do you use it for. And a lot of times in our society, we have very narrow ways of defining, what the successful career is. It's very much tied to, salary and like what kind of, do you have the corner office or not? And it can leave a lot of people feeling very unfulfilled after pursuing this for a lot of years. So that's one. Then two is that we focus on maximum impact. Sometimes we joke a little bit that when I was hired at the school as one of the researchers that we actually we actually try to kind of counter argue this narrative that a lot of what you hear is like small is beautiful, less is more, but actually if you do the research, you find out that actually more is more. And kind of what it comes down to is you can help one person, and that's really great. But if you help 100 people, then that's 100 people more, right? So we're really trying to focus on where can we help the most amount of people, the most amount of animals, where can we do the most good. So this also kind of translates to, we're not just doing what we think is good because we want to feel good about ourselves, but actually we want to see the outcomes of it. So we really like results driven. So we're really trying to see a bit of pragmatism in our work. So not just trying to do what's right, but also what we see that is working. So that's two. Then the third, it will lead us to our prioritization part, and it is what we call follow the Gandalf. And what we mean by this. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the story, in Lord of the Rings, right? There's this grand story about this. The world is really at stake. There's this wizard. He knocks on Frodo's door, and he says, Frodo, there's this all of this is going on, terrible thing, something about an evil wizard, but here's the solution. There's this ring. You got to throw it in this like mountain, volcano, and then we'll be saved. Sometimes, so we also have this joke that what he didn't say to Frodo is, Frodo, what's your passion, right? What do you want to do in life, and how can I help you? And this is really, it's a good metaphor for our work, because if you look throughout history, a lot of the great heroes of history were really guided by what was needed in the world, rather than what they necessarily like to do most. So it's kind of a bit different than the narrative that we hear a lot about careers, about finding your passion and all of this. So that's really, we take this Gandalf Frodo approach to our work in SMA, that we really want to focus on the things that are most pressing. And you might, there's something there, I think, because if you just, this is why we want to prioritize, but it's a valid question of why would you spend so much time and resources on trying to figure out, where to spend your time and resources, because there's something there, especially since, one of the founding principles of the school is action. So you could also say, let's just spend that time on actually doing something, right? So what is underlying there is a key belief about how the world works. So intuitively, often we have this sense that a lot of things have what in statistics you would call normal distribution. So what that means is, take, for example, the example of height. I think for the global average of female height is about 160 centimeters. And it really follows this kind of normal distribution, meaning, most women are about that height. And if you get closer to the extremes, both very short, very tall, there's less and less people are represented by that. So if that would be kind of the same with, for example, the effectiveness of solutions that we have to world problems, then I think it would make sense to say, let's just, spend our time on actually doing something, because it's probably better spent that way, right? If most things are kind of average, and then there's some that are a little bit less effective, maybe some that are a little bit more effective. However, we believe that when it comes to world problems and the solutions to them, things aren't quite distributed like that. And rather it follows what in statistics, again, you call a power law distribution. So what this means is, again, if you take the kind of the same example of like the effectiveness of solutions to world problems, most solutions are very, very ineffective. They don't do so much. And then there's a very small amount of solutions that are super effective. And this is very counterintuitive for a lot of us, because imagine if this would be the same for like height of people, then it means most people are like really small. They're like, we are all like kind of like dwarfs. And then there are like some like really small percentage of people who are like giants or like super big. So it's very counterintuitive, but we believe that when it comes to, you know, like how like problems and solutions, this is how it's distributed. And I kind of want to take you through, you know, some examples of where you can kind of see some of this going on. So this is a statistics from our rolled in data, which is a really great organization who, for a lot of different topics, gather like the actual data on things. And in this case, it's on the share of human deaths by cause. And you see a very big difference. And I also wanted to ask you, because we did cross out some of them. I think I can launch this poll. There we go. So I'm curious if you could get a sense of what is the top kind of, yeah, cause of death in this graph. I see a lot of it coming in, but I will give you a little bit more time. Okay, people are still thinking and voting. All right. So a lot of you actually got really good intuition on this, or just good knowledge on this. So I will also show you at the same time. Yeah, most of you are right. It is cardiovascular disease. And I think malaria was the second on the list, so pretty close. Yeah, here you see just one of this, one example of this, where it's really quite, yeah, quite a difference, right? Where these causes are coming from. See if I can close it now. Yes, I can. And you don't just see this. So this is on kind of problems, if you will. But you see the same in certain problem areas in their solutions. Sorry, I'm still sharing this poll. So here you see the interventions of global health interventions, like how effective they are. And you see exactly this power law. So you see that, and for global health and development, we know this quite well. That's why we have this data. By the way, this is not our data. But you see that, you know, a lot of these interventions are not very effective. And then you see that some are like incredibly effective. So that's really kind of a very counterintuitive belief that we have about the world, that, you know, it's a world of power laws in a lot of things. It's a lot of times the world is very kind of counterintuitive like this. And it basically means, you know, that there are a lot of problems in the world. Some problems are much bigger in terms of like scale, like how many people, how many animals do they affect than others. And there are, you know, many ways to try and solve them. And some of these solutions, interventions, they're much more effective than others. So you could say kind of why is this the case? Well, it's because there's no real kind of market mechanism behind, you know, how it would be in a for-profit world, where kind of through this market mechanism, you know, the resources are steered to, you know, where it kind of this feedback, right? Like here, there's no direct feedback mechanism that where most kind of impact is possible, that there is necessarily where the most resources are steered towards. So that's kind of missing there. We don't have that kind of feedback loop. So this is, yeah, I think you can see this as kind of like glass half empty or glass half full situation, where, you know, maybe you can say a lot of things don't matter as much. I like to think about it more as, you know, it's a good thing in a way, because it means that if you know, think about it carefully, you have a really good, you have a chance of making a lot of extraordinary impact. And I wanted to say this in the beginning, but basically I showed you in the start what the different sections are that I'd like to take you through. And I kind of want to stop after every section to see if there are questions. I'm not sure if we managed to get through them all, if there are a lot, but I'd like to open the floor a little bit to questions, thoughts. Feel free to shoot.
Thanks. I have a question. Sorry, my camera doesn't work. But I was wondering, how do you think you could measure how important problem signs are to focus on?
Yeah, that's a good one. I will actually come to that later. So I will park it for now. But please come back to me if you feel like that I haven't answered your questions. The next part I'm going through is kind of like, how can you, this is kind of like why it's important to prioritize. And I will take you through, how then do you prioritize? How can you kind of get a sense of, which problems, which kind of solutions to take you through. So yeah, I think I will answer you there.
Thank you very much.
And Linne, I believe that there are some questions in the chat. So maybe if you could go through these, that would be great.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, I got 2 people asking things about parallels. I want to understand parallels better. Are you saying that we as people lose the value of observations if the number of observations is high? Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to phrase it. The thing is, we are not kind of evolved to work with those big numbers, right? We don't have good intuitions for them. It doesn't mean much to us, which is also the case why you see for a lot of like charities and stuff, that not necessarily the biggest problems and solutions get like the most amount of money, because we're not primarily driven to focus these kind of like numbers games. So it's kind of similar with this. So we don't really, let me see if I can just get back to this. Yeah, we just don't really get this. It's very counterintuitive. We can get it kind of on a theoretical level, but in practice, yeah, we don't really follow this. Usually, it's really means that a lot of these like things that we do, they usually fall in this kind of category. So that's kind of like this as well. You can see a lot of these different shares that might cause. And if you would have asked me this to kind of give an intuition on this, not seeing this, I would probably, I would just be saying anything. I have no idea. Like, we're not kind of primed to know any of this. So that's why I think it is important to be guided by a lot of these numbers. All right, I think I see a follow-up or not. But let's see, how do you avoid the trap of jumping on easy wins instead of sending the effort to find the effective solutions to hard problems? So I think where you're getting to, Felipe, is kind of like how do you avoid the very kind of easy to measure stuff instead of maybe like the bigger things that don't necessarily, that's not very clear, very measurable, but they might actually solve more kind of root problems. I think that's a super interesting question, and I think it also kind of relates to what your role is as an organization. This it's a trade-off. I think you can make big risks if you think you can really make, like, if you can really reach like milestones to really shift a core problem. And this is also always it's a bit of a cliche answer, but I would say both is necessary. And with SMA, we also we want to prioritize both. So we have some of these programs that we do that are more direct, what you might be able to call easy wins. So it's very clear. And I will give you more of the examples a bit later in the presentation, but where it's really clear, if you do this, then we know it will lead to X, Y, Z. And then there's also some where it's a bit more of a gamble. But of course, a lot of these gambles are definitely worth it. We need to take a lot of gambles. So yeah, I hope that answers it. Okay, let's see. I want to scroll up because I think I might have missed.
Yeah, I think there was one question by Yogi. And then, how do we define less and more? Can you maybe answer that still?
How do we find less and more? This is one area where effective authors, for example, have empirically got it wrong. I'm not sure if I get the question completely. It might be related to this because I'm hearing this, maybe. This really for us relates to the point of maximum impact. So I think there are a lot of different ways, kind of moral frameworks to doing good, and you could write a whole PhD and more about this. This comes down a little bit to utilitarianism, if you're familiar with that, but it basically means that some of these things we think are measurable, and it is the more is kind of related to numbers. So how many people, how many animals, rather than I can also work at an animal shelter and I can help a few animals, but I can really change their lives. And that's really great. I have worked in an animal shelter, so that's really great, but it's not necessarily the same as like trying to tackle factory farming at a scale. So I would say that's how you define less and more. So it is related to scale. And I think all of this, a lot of these questions become easier to answer, easier to place, I think, in the next section also of the presentation, because there we will go through a lot of these concepts that we use to do this. So I actually also think I might continue because I feel a lot of sense and need to go there from you to kind of get better sense of, then how do you do this, of course. So let's take it there, because this is what I'm, hearing from you a little bit. If we kind of get back to the Gandalf point, of course, we don't live in a world of Lord of the Rings where there's a really great world and there is one big evil problem and one solution to it. The reality that we live in is that there are a million of evil wizards, or whatever you want to get that metaphor. And there are 1,000 rings that we can throw in 1,000 mountains, so why, how do you know what to choose? So I can take you through, our framework, how we do that. And it comes down to the very simplified version of it is our SSS framework, which you might have been familiar with. So looking at problems that are sizable, solvable, and sorely overlooked. If we start with, and not just problems, by the way, this also relates to solutions. So if we start with sizable, this is what we linked to just before in one of the questions, how big is a problem? Like I said, how many people or animals does it affect, and how scalable is a solution? So like I said, some are much more straightforward than others. And also this gets hard when you want to compare it between kind of problem areas, which is also relating to the question about easy wins versus kind of bigger ones. So for example, within a certain problem area, it is quite straightforward to think about size. Like for example, for tobacco, we looked at cardiovascular disease. One of the big drivers here is tobacco. We know that tobacco is the biggest cause of preventable human death worldwide, with 8 million deaths annually. I believe this is like 13 times malaria. And this is more than the total amount of people who have died in all wars throughout history. So it's really, really big. It gets harder if you want to compare this across kind of problems, because of course, how do you compare these numbers with the potential risk of a new pandemic, for example? Or how do you compare this to the enormous amount of animals, for example, that are killed for food production purposes? So there's like 220 million farmed animals killed daily for food production purposes, which is excluding hundreds of millions of fish and over a billion shrimp, which means, this is really hard to compare between problem areas, but we do, within the School for Moral Ambition, we do apply what we call moral circle expansion to our thinking. So it means that we don't just care about, the people that are living in our close circle, but also people who are living further away. And the same for not just people, but we also care about other animals that are able to suffer. And also not just people and animals living today, but also future generations. So if you think about this size question, you can also apply that to solutions. So you might be aware that food transition is one of our focus areas. And one of the reasons why we chose this, not just for animal welfare concerns, but also because, animal agriculture is one of the leading drivers for a lot of the big problems that we have in our world right now. Right, if we're talking like climate change, biodiversity, global health, pandemic risks, like I think you have a whole list you can go through. So you can also think about size in this way. So how many different problems does it address? Next, I want to take you through our sorely overlooked. So it's another concept that we use to think about these kind of questions. How neglected is a certain problem or solution type? And this is very much related to the comparison to its scale. So something might be very neglected, but maybe it's also not so very relevant, right? You can think about sorely overlooked in terms of how many people are working on it, so full-time equivalents. You can think about it in terms of how much funding is directed to it. Just some examples, like for example, in global health and development, we know that prevention type of things are just not very sexy. There's not really a lot of people or money flowing towards it. In comparison to kind of cure solutions, like just took this example of cancer research, where you see, this is not really neglected at all. I mean, luckily so. There's a lot of things, resources there. And a way you can think about it as well is you can zoom into a certain problem and solution. So for example, take climate change. Luckily, it's not a really neglected problem anymore. And a lot of really talented people are working on solutions to this, but there might be some solution types that haven't really had a lot of focus. So you can also kind of think about it like that. It doesn't just mean something is like good or bad in terms of neglectedness, but you can kind of try to get to the details a little bit. So there might be certain solution types to climate change that are really overlooked and that have a lot of potential. So just to get an example of this neglectedness compared to scale, linking back to animal welfare, which is one of our focus areas. So in terms of scale, I already kind of mentioned this, it's really massive. There's more than 80 billion land animals killed yearly for food production purposes. And that means there's more animals killed for food every day than a total amount of people killed in all wars throughout history. And again, it's every day. So it's really crazy. And that's excluding, again, the fish and shrimps. And also in terms of kind of scale of how you know, the situation where they are raised in. You see that 90% farmed animals are raised in factory farms. So it's also not like a majority of animals is raised in what you could call more humane circumstances. And just to go through this kind of exercise in, you know, how you can think about neglectedness, here you see that 97% of philanthropic funding in the US, but we have a lot of reason to see that this is relatively similar globally, is directed to human-related causes. And then there's the remaining 3% is divided between environmental and animal welfare issues. And within this funding spent on animal welfare, within that 3%, within the animal welfare funding, there's only 1% that's dedicated to farmed animals, even though they make up more than 99% of our domesticated animals. So yeah, just show you here, for example, you can really see that neglectedness, where you see that just, very little money flowing into this. Again, here, this is scale versus neglectedness. On the left, you can see the total number of animals per kind of category group. So farmed animals, laboratory animals, or shelters, and the total number. And you see that, of course, farmed animals are the vast majority. And then you see within animal charities, the amount really flows mostly to shelter. So one of the ways where you can just get a little bit sense of, you know, how neglected is a solution. Then the last one is our solvability. So how you can think about solvability of issues is, for example, you know, are there realistic policy windows to make change on this? Are there possibilities to form coalitions with different groups on this? But also, do we know what progress on a certain problem looks like, or is that very uncertain? And I will give you an example of that in a bit. So if we see one of the things that has really strong solvability, one of the things that really stands out is our tobacco. The reason why we chose for tobacco reform, because it's just very clear cut. There's very strong evidence for the effectiveness of the regulations that we have. They're called the Empower regulations. So, this includes taxation of products. And it's just very clear. You see that as that rises, the numbers of people who smoke go down. So it's very strong in the sense of, you know, we know how to solve this. But there's also some that for which is just very uncertain. So one key area which we have been focusing on a lot the last already a bit more than a year, I would say, is democratic resilience, which is huge in scale. Not necessarily in people dying, mostly, but you could say it's kind of the mother of all issues in a way, because if we don't have strong institutions, then how are we going to, you know, even do, for example, tobacco reform? It's not going to work if we don't have strong institutions. So in terms of scale, it's really big, and it's also very urgent at the moment. In terms of, you know, why do we have a running program on it yet? Is really this point of, do we know what progress looks like? We don't really know what the path looks like yet. We don't really know what interventions can work on a large scale, but we are still researching this. And luckily, there are a lot of organizations who are looking into this. The other example was loneliness. So it's actually really, really large scale as well, in terms of just suffering. But even if you look at years of lives lost, because it actually does a big contributor to people dying at earlier ages, interestingly. So it's really big in scale and it's growing, but it's really hard to find scalable solutions for this. So that's just some examples. Let's just stop there for a second. Curious if this has answered some questions, if it has raised some questions. Feel free to shoot if you want. I will also check the chat to see if this question coming in. Oh, there's a lot. Okay, I'm just gonna pick some out because there's a lot. Okay, we got Chris saying, referring the sorely overlooked slide, it appears that the direction of funding and effort goes towards what evokes emotion, especially fear in humans. Is this correct? And how can we encourage focus in the areas that don't currently generate fear amongst the majorities? Yeah, you're right. I'll take it. Yeah, I think it's true. It really does mostly go again, like how in what evokes emotions in us. And again, I think it relates to how we are evolved to respond to those things. And not just, I would say, what evokes emotions in humans more generally, but of course, what evokes emotions in the humans who are able to do something about it or who are able to speak up about it and whose voices are more often heard. So unfortunately, it's not even just where the fear is highest, it's more where the fear is highest among the people who eventually take action. And in your second question, how can we increase the focus in areas that don't currently generate fear? It's a really good question. I think, I don't know if I have the full answer on how to do it, but I think a shift in thinking about these type of issues is one. So, being led not just by emotions, but also by data and kind of changing the world of doing good a little bit towards this. There's a lot of, good organizations working on this through funding. Of course, we're also trying to do that, for example, through presentations like this and just through our work in general. I think it's always gonna be an uphill battle because it's just not very intuitive for us. Let's see. I think we have some upvotes on this one. I also saw it a second ago, so I will address Kristen's question. Can you share the relationship between the School for Moral Ambition and the Center of Effective Altruism? Yes. I'm thinking if it makes sense to, I'm guessing from the upvotes, I don't really have to explain it too much about what effective altruism is. So what I would say is that a lot of, we don't have formal relationships, but a lot of our thoughts are kind of, they have their foundations there. And some of the people who work at SMA have some foundations there originally. And I think on a content level, what I would say is the radical prioritization. The followed agenda of radical prioritization and focus on impact is very much rooted in some of the concepts that are also present in effective altruism. What I would say is different from SMA and effective altruism is we don't focus just purely on a lot of these things that have been traditionally very measurable. And I think we are looking we're maybe a little bit more willing to make some bets, like why we focus on these democratic resilience research, but also why we, for example, have our third fellowship that launched this year, which is our tax fairness fellowship, which is aiming to increase the taxation of the ultra rich. People who often effectively pay less than just regular working people. And why this is different from traditional kind of effective altruism is, I think, related to a bit values. So I mentioned utilitarianism before, really focusing on, the amount of people we can help. This is very important to us as well, but I think we have this extra layer of, there's also other things that are important. There are just general, forms of injustices, power imbalances that we also care about. It's why, for example, we are running with this Tax Fairness Fellowship, which is not necessarily guided by that, there's the most amount of lives you can save there. So that's one, I think that's the answer I would give there. So one follow-up question that I will do immediately, and then I will go to someone else. Kristen, you also asked the original question, I think. You asked, did I hear correctly that the difference is that you don't focus just on measurable, but that estimate is more value-driven? I would say it's not more value-driven. I think it's different values. So that's what I meant with we are not purely utilitarian in the sense of like just focus on the numbers of where we can do kind of like clear-cut like impact. But we also take into account other forms, other values you would have. So for example, justice, things like this. So I wouldn't say it's like more value. I think it's a different value system. It's more what I would say. All right, let me see to get a different one.
Linne, I think maybe one more and then to your last part. Otherwise, you might run over.
Yes, that's a good one. Thanks. All right, let me take this one from Soriana. You asked, what about urgency? Things like threats from AI or growing authoritarianism might be more important to look into ASAP to be able to, after they are resolved, work with a lot of things. Thanks. This is a very interesting question. I would say yes, and this really relates to, I think, my previous answer, that there's this kind of, it's like the difference between what is going on right now and how can we improve lives and what are really the threats for the future, and might make all of our efforts that we're doing now kind of not worthwhile. So yeah, you're right. So for us, all of these kind of threats, it's both the impact right now and it's also impact in the kind of the frame in which we live, which has to be kind of healthy. I think urgency is a very important thing here. Unfortunately, it's often harder to measure. So solvability is usually an issue there. But again, doesn't mean don't touch it. Just it's a little bit more work for you to figure out how to touch it. Yes, we do have to move on indeed. We were here. As a kind of last bit, I want to take you through something which is slightly different but related, which is the concept called value over replacement layer. I'm curious how many people actually have heard of this. You don't have to answer it, but maybe just kind of raise your hand if you've heard of it at all. So just I can get a kind of just to get a kind of sense if it's very, there's some. I see like about 6. Okay, some. Okay, good. So this term is something that originally came from baseball. So of course, in competitive sports, often what happens is that you're trying to figure out the value of a particular player, because you need to know as a, I don't know if baseball players play in the club or whatever, but they need to know how much are they worth because you're paying for that player. So what they used to do is they used to count in baseball the amount of home runs a player makes to see, okay, this player is worth this much. Then there was an analyst who at some point said, actually this doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not the amount of runs a player makes, but actually how much more does a player make than who would have been their replacer if, for example, they were sick. And what this gets down to is not just what is their value, but what is their added value. Is really kind of gets down to what value they bring to the team. And you can translate this to different areas in work as well. And if you translate it to impact, it really means where do you have your largest, what you will call VORP, so like value of replacement player. Where could you make the most impact, not necessarily as a set thing, but really added, like who would otherwise work in your position if you would not be there, and how much more impact do you make because you are working there. That's really kind of what it's about, and I want to illustrate it a little bit through an example. One of our ambassadors, one of the cantors, she was a lung physician, and she used to treat a lot of people dying from lung cancer. And at some point she thought, I am helping a lot of people, but I am just doing this kind of person by person, and the underlying cause of why these people are coming in, I'm not able to address it. So she became a kind of activist against the tobacco industry, very vocal in media. She's often in talk shows, really speaking up against it. And there you see her added value, her VORP, is in a lot of ways so much bigger, because if you think of this in terms of who was her replacer, you can say, who was her replacer when she was a physician? She might have been, I don't know how good of a physician she was. She might have been a really good physician, and maybe she's better than the person who would have replaced her. But being a physician is quite a high status job in our society, and a lot of people, there's a long waiting list of people going into this education. So, if she doesn't do this, then there is someone else who will stand there and do it. Maybe she might do it a little bit better. Then if you think of her as this activist, there was no replacer. There was no kind of job position that she applied to, and that there would have been someone else who would have done this. So there you can see, VORP is huge because no one else was doing this otherwise. And of course, she's doing the same concepts still apply. You can still apply the same framework of this SSS, because she's able to try to address this problem at a much bigger scale. So I am curious if you can think of some of the kind of considerations if we're talking about impact. If you have some ideas of what are some considerations you can have about VORP in terms of impact. So what can you think of that would increase or decrease your value of replacement player? And if you have questions, also feel free to post them, because I can also answer a little bit more. But I'm also curious if you have some ideas of what could influence a VORP, and then I can see if I have similar ideas. All right, first I see a comment, which is Felipe are saying, this notion of value seems to completely ignore interactions between players and teamwork. And you're right, it does. It does. So of course, our reality is like endlessly complex, and every kind of concept you'll have about it is going to be somewhat simplistic, but it can be valuable to, nevertheless. So I think it's similar here. So it is in a way simplistic, because of course it's also about how do they interact, how well are they in tune to each other, and of course all of that is true, but it doesn't take away from still some baseball players are much better at being baseball player than others. There is a reason why clubs are paying a lot different amounts for different players. So I think you're right. So thanks for mentioning that. Still think it's about, yeah.
If I may ask, I'm the one who asked this question. As the reason I asked the question is because I feel there is a tendency to turn that into waiting for a superhero to solve the problem, whereas in a lot of cases it's just teamwork. Maybe there is a face for an organization, but that face is just the face, and it's the arms and the legs that actually do the work, and it might distract people from actually trying to build those organizations to give them weight. This is why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think it will, it ties to me to one of the different considerations around the VORP, because this kind of like how good are you at like scoring runs is just one of them. I think someone also mentioned them. Where did we have them? I lost it in the chat now, but just some kind of general like quality of like how good are you to how well are you able to perform your work. But there are a lot of different considerations to it, and I think if you're just seeing it at a narrow vision, then I think you're right, because then you can always say, oh, then there's always might be someone better, right, to do this. But it might, I think actually this concept more kind of gives people agency to really see that for a lot of the time there are always places where you are uniquely like positioned to contribute, and where you should feel more confident to do it. But I'm curious if, I feel free go through it, because I think there will come, it will come once we see some of these considerations. People might have mentioned it. Let me see. So someone said how unique or distinctive your capabilities are. So I think indeed that's one of them. Your network is one of them. The amount of talent you have, the ease in which you do, audience, credibility. And then Arthur mentioned, I suppose, your willingness to stick to something relative to others, which I really like, because I think this is indeed one of the things that really can create a strong VORP. So there is the doing it, but there's also being able to really stick and have some dedication to it, where you know that other people probably might have dropped the ball. And I think it also relates to what I would call here values, a little bit slightly different, but I think it's connected. And it is so it's not necessarily like how well are you going to do it, but it's also in some places of work. So say often this is about governments or policy related spaces. You might not necessarily be like like objectively better person to do the job, but you might have a different set of values to bring. So you might have this set of values that you really care about the problem that you want to change. You might care about climate change. You might care about democratic institutions. And the other person who is there might not. They might just be there because it's a high status job and they just kind of run the mill. So this is also where you can really have a VORP. And the other part, what a lot of people mentioned, skill sets, network, experience. Yeah, that's also one of them. And this often relates to where are there places where there is a scarcity of talent. So usually a lot of for-profit organizations and companies pay better wages, and that often means that they have access to more talent. So you can work at like a really great organization But because there are a lot of people kind of in line to work there, because it's also just a really cool place to work, the other person who is there, if you wouldn't do it, is probably also pretty good at doing it. But if you, for example, look at more kind of NGO work or other places that don't really have this access to talent, you might be really, really much better than the person who would otherwise do the work. Yeah, so it's really thinking about this counterfactual. What would happen if I wouldn't be here? And I think the biggest kind of clumps for me would be this kind of quality, how good are you, and values. But this really relates to, as a final point, which I think is important to make, where are you going to work? If you work for an organization that does really great, amazing work, then I would argue this values part is less important, in the sense that you don't necessarily need to have the best set of values, because you just need to be really great at your job, and then you help that organization who already does great work. If you're going to be in a more, what you would call, entrepreneurial role, that could be in governments, but also in organizations that are not really what we would call aligned, in a sense of not necessarily focusing maybe on the biggest potential solutions to a problem. There you can have a lot of added value by having your values or your specific knowledge to change something, because that organization is not necessarily doing that, but you might help them do that. So I think that's an important distinction to make, kind of where you work really also matters in terms of how much is your value or your quality. Yeah, adding more value.
I think, Linne, we're running out of time. We only have 1 more minute.
1 minute. Yeah, wow. Yeah, sorry not to have been able to answer more of your questions. I think there were a lot, to be honest.
Well, maybe if you're open to it, Linne, people can reach you via the platform and send you their question.
Yeah.
And then perhaps we can go to the very last slide, where I will come in again to ask you for the nicest part, which is feedback. Yeah, we have a 30-second survey for some questions. If you are open to giving it, that would be very valuable to know, whether this was valuable for you. So that would be great. And whilst we give you the time to do so, I want to thank Linne for giving this amazing presentation. And I think, well, the chat says it all. There is just so much questions and so much enthusiasm for these topics. So thank you all for being so engaged, and thank you all for joining.